Joining me today is Tara Barton. Tara is the Director of Serve Learn Educational Consultants and is joining us today from Melbourne, Australia. Tara and I first met in South Africa when Tara was a teacher at the American International School in Johannesburg. And I was in Johannesburg doing a 3-day workshop and we connected there. I was working with the school. And since then, Tara has left her teaching position and started her own leadership and consulting company, Serve Learn. And that is why I've asked Tara to join me today, because really intrigued by this idea. And I think a lot of listeners will enjoy what Tara has to say about service learning. Tara and I share actually a number of schools that we work with. We haven't worked directly together in the schools simultaneously, but we have worked with many schools that overlap, including the American International School in Lagos, Nigeria. And we've also spoken at many conferences at the same time as well. So I've always been very impressed with Tara's work and really intrigued by this idea of service learning. So with all of that, Tara, I really want to welcome you to the Tom Schimmer podcast. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Thanks, Tom. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I have been for a while because, a lot of folks talk about service learning, or they maybe think about service learning light, but I really want to get into what the substance of service learning is. And I'm really excited to have you here. But I want to go on a bit of a tangent to begin with, because as I said in the introduction, Tara is joining us from Melbourne, Australia. And of course, in this time of COVID, uh, you know, the situation in Australia has been in the news here in North America for sure. Recently, Australia has instituted very strict lockdown procedures and quarantine rules that you all have just come out of. So for our listening audience, just, and from your perspective, uh, did it work? What's the status of COVID right now as far as, Melbourne and Australia in general? And what was your experience with that lockdown? And from your perspective, how successful was it?
All right. So I've been in lockdown pretty much for 8 months. And I've been in two countries. So I was in South Africa when the first lockdown happened. I missed my flight by a day. So my boys and I were 5 weeks in lockdown in Johannesburg. And you couldn't leave your house except to go get groceries. And that was like once a week you were supposed to sort of head out. You weren't allowed to go out and exercise. So
Mhm.
we were lucky we had a big backyard. So, the kids and I would run around and that was fine. And then the day before that finished, I got the flight home with the boys. And then we did 2 weeks in quarantine in Melbourne at a hotel.
Mhm.
Uh, Testing was optional on the second test. First test we got done when we first arrived. It was negative. And then some people, didn't take the second test. So then a second wave hit from people that came out of quarantine who didn't take the second test. So we opted to have the test because I've got an elderly father that I wanted to make sure we were definitely all clear before we went and saw him. And it was still, things were open still then for 2 weeks. And then the second wave hit. And then, we got up to 1,000 cases and per day. And, our government just decided that's it, we're going to lock it down. Um, Mixed reactions. I've definitely got friends that are on one side of the fence and I'm sort of in between. I sort of, listen to both sides, and I feel grateful that we are now COVID free. People complained about it and the economy has suffered, but I think the economy can recover. I'd rather be alive and healthy and safe
Right,
than,
right.
be so worried about that. But I know a lot of businesses have struggled during the time. So I can
Yeah,
see both sides. But the government's really supportive and helps people, with benefits and things like that. So,
yeah.
um, yeah.
It's been interesting just from afar to listen to, because
Mm,
sometimes you see things, you don't know what's true and what's not true and all of that. And it has, I
yeah.
mean, I think it's wrong to look at one side and ignore the other. It has taken its
Mm,
toll on businesses. It has taken its toll on people's mental health, and we can't
mm,
ignore that side of it either. But
yeah.
at the same time, nobody wants to just be fast and loose with COVID and trying to find our way through that. And so it's great to hear that the government's been very supportive of individuals, but also of businesses to try
Yeah.
to help bridge those gaps.
Yeah,
So
and there's lots of
hopefully, yeah,
initiatives. Yeah, lots of
yeah,
initiatives to try and, generate work again. So, I mean, I think things will pick up again now. Now things are open again, which is really
yeah,
nice. And we've had no cases.
yeah,
We're COVID free for a month now, which is
right.
lovely.
And it's summer for you, and
Yes.
yeah, so
We can
that's
go out and enjoy paddleboarding.
that's always nice. Okay, let's shift gears here and get into exactly why I invited you onto the podcast. And this is about service learning. So let's start with the big overarching question, which is, what is service learning, and why, from your perspective, Tara, is it so important?
So most people know of community service, and in Australia it's quite unknown, service learning. So
Mm,
it's even hard to sort of, you know, have a conversation with people because most people don't understand it. In America, most people understand what service learning is, but it's always been one of those questions that comes up, and you've got to. I find it's easier just to break it down into parts. So like I said, most people know community and service, and that's a big part of it. But we need to include learning in that equation, and that's where service learning comes in. So, the way I've been taught service learning and been practicing service learning with teachers is through the 5 stages,
okay.
and the 5 stages really help students and teachers understand how to get to action in a positive and meaningful way. And so that has been helpful for schools and students being able to do that individually on their own. So really it's about connecting transdisciplinary skills and dispositions. So often schools aren't teaching those skills and dispositions that we really need. And I find service learning as one of those things that can help you know, get kids out into the community and helping the community, understanding their needs, and using things like concepts. So if you look at concepts in the curriculum, I've found that has been a really great way for teachers to be able to integrate service learning. So if you look at a concept like sustainability, students can look at that from many different lenses, and then they use the 5 stages to be able to um, go and do some sort of action based on the needs of the community.
So it's more about infusing these concepts into different
Yeah.
subject areas, and trying
Yeah.
to,
So,
yeah.
and that's what makes it, cross-disciplinary as well, which is
Mhm,
great. So it can be in any subject area,
mhm,
So our curriculum that we've created is really about having those concepts and units, basically.
mhm,
And we've set it up in a way that, every grade level to start with has a concept that they're working on, K-12.
mhm.
And the idea is that everyone is doing service on the same day of the week, basically,
Okay.
1 hour once a week. And that way, all students are doing service learning and all teachers are involved with service learning at the same
Mhm,
time. And it's
mhm.
not often in schools, it's one person's job to sort of do service learning, but every school vision and mission is about, raising responsible global citizens, right? But
Right.
we often don't think about how we are actually doing that in schools. And
Mhm,
so what happens if you have a service learning program is that you've got kids that come out and want to do service. It's an intrinsic motivation. They're passionate about what they do
mhm.
because they've had those opportunities. And so, a big part of what we need to be doing in schools is offering those opportunities for students for that
Right.
collaborative learning with the community.
That is such a good point about, how often we put in our mission statements or vision statements, so, the idea of a global citizen or responsible global citizen, or,
Mhm.
but when do we get to the point where we actually talk about how we're going to develop that? I was intrigued by the Venn diagram that is on your website, and that you
Yeah.
definitely spend a lot of time sort of sharing, and the idea about those 3 essential components of service learning:
Mhm.
teaching teaching and learning, and you mentioned that earlier about the learning
Mhm.
part being important. So there's the teaching and learning part, there's the collaboratives and the partnerships, right?
Mhm.
And of course, there's the service part. That's
Yeah.
those sort of three together bring
Mhm.
together that service learning part. So how do all three of those interrelate more specifically? And in your mind, how do they bring together the ideal of what service learning can be all about?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's important for schools to know where they're at too. So we have a survey on our website so people can, take that for free and know exactly where they're at. But you have to have partnerships with the community. You
Mhm.
need to look at what's happening in the curriculum. So when I was talking about the concepts, so if we just even look at the curriculum and the partnerships, bringing those together, bringing experts to students to understand important global issues,
Mhm.
and then the service comes. That's the latter part. So we shouldn't be jumping straight into service. We need to understand the community partners. And I say collaboratives because sometimes we don't always have a partnership that is, reciprocal all year long. It might be that a partnership, a collaborative is just like a one-off, like you might be working with someone from the UN on human rights.
Mhm.
So that's what I'd probably call a collaborative. Maybe once off during the year, during a unit, they might get the experts in. So, but a partnership should be an ongoing reciprocal relationship during the year. And ideally working with many different students and different groups depending on what their needs are.
Mhm.
And we want to have a range of partnerships. So when we look at partnerships with schools, we're looking at, do we have a partnership with the environment, working with people, working with animals, because then we're sort of covering all of those areas that students are interested in as well.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, many different partners you can have. And, when I was at ASJ, we had, so many, it was,
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
over capacity with partners at some stage. So, you
Yeah.
have to develop things to be able to, make sure your partnerships are sustainable and projects
Right.
are sustainable and keep growing.
It is, it seems to me that it's such a wonderful way to build relevance into the work we do with students to help them understand the whys of what they're learning and how connected they can be. And you're right, if you're talking about just people, then you leave out environment, you leave out animals, you leave out all of the opportunities that sort of I guess tap into student passion and the things that they care
Yeah.
about and the things that they love. So that seems to me like a really great way when people talk about relevance in the curriculum. A
Mm.
service learning model seems to be a way to really get at not just the global citizen part, but then also talking about how we can connect what the students are learning to a real authentic kind of experience, right? That level of authenticity
Exactly.
seems, yeah,
Yeah. We talk about authenticity, and you can't get more authentic than doing action with students, in the
mhm,
community,
yeah,
collaboratively with partners. I mean,
right.
it's a that beautiful reciprocal relationship. They're learning from each other.
Hmm.
And you can set up all sorts of, projects in the classroom, but it's not the
Hmm.
same as, getting out into the community. And,
Right.
there's different types of actions students can do as part of the service. So we
Hmm.
talked about, the connecting the curriculum as well as the partners. But when we
Hmm.
talk about that, the types of actions students can do, I had a few
Hmm.
teachers ask, well, we can't do service during, lockdown and COVID. And I was like, what do you mean? There's many different types of action,
Right.
kids can be involved in. So,
Hmm.
um, there's advocacy, you can do indirect, direct, and
Hmm.
research. So there's
Right.
many different avenues. And, you can always do direct action later. You can still do all the research and prep yourself to be able to do the direct
Okay.
action. But
Oh, right.
yeah, there are just different options. So it's getting kids to think, okay, well, what else could I, do while I'm at home and still be helping people in the
Right.
community?
Right. So is that kind of the key to, if my passion is not local, if my passion
Mm,
is say I have an environmental concern or something I'm
yeah.
very passionate about, but it's not a local issue, it's more of a global issue. So you
Mm.
can't really immerse me into that environment. So how does that is that what you're talking about with the indirect
Yeah,
influence of the research?
indirect.
Yeah.
So you might be creating a website for an organization, that's a need that they have,
Hmm.
that they're, a small business, they're doing great things, but they haven't got a marketing, or they're,
Right.
they're not on social media. So those are the
Hmm.
sorts of things students could be involved in to sort of help
Hmm.
out.
Yeah.
It might be an advocacy campaign for that,
Hmm.
cause that they put on
Right.
TikTok, So there's things
Hmm.
kids can be doing, and programs that they're interested in, apps that they love using. It's just matching those together.
Yeah, I think, for me, and maybe this is true of many adults, we kind of
Mm.
rightly or wrongly, probably wrongly, think of service as that direct, hands-on. I'm
Yeah,
immersed in that environment. But as you talk about a social media campaign or a website,
yeah,
marketing awareness, there's just so many ways that students can contribute in meaningful ways that don't require them to be in those environments. So I love that.
exactly. Yeah.
Really, really great perspective on that. So I know you talk about the five most essential outcomes that drive personal growth and student development. And they are a strong sense of identity. You talk about connection and contribution to the world, which is clearly what we've been talking about.
Mhm.
A strong sense of well-being, being confident and involved, and being effective communicators. So I want to ask you kind of a two-part question about those five essential outcomes. Uh,
Yeah.
why those five? But more importantly, how does service learning, how does the model maximize the opportunity for students to grow in those five areas?
So for me, I think it's one of those things where kids, they're sort of pushed to grow in those areas because they have to be able to communicate. They have to be able to problem solve.
Mhm.
They need to have empathy to understand the issues and how they're going to, work with the community. So all of those, I call them global competencies, because
Okay.
they're skills and dispositions kids are going to need in now and in the future.
Right.
So the more opportunities we can give for students to be able to be immersed in
Mhm.
developing those skills, um, I like to give students some goal setting and reflection at the start of the service learning process, and even at the start of the year, at the start of the unit, whichever, where kids self-assess those skills. So how am I a communicator, whether I'm written or verbal, or what skills do I actually need to improve? So they self-assess, they understand where they're at, and then they can set goals through their service learning, or through their unit they're working on, to actually improve on that. So it's about them knowing where they're at and knowing what they need to do to actually improve in that
Yeah.
area.
Yeah. It strikes me that those five outcomes, in a way, are so immersed in the model that students don't necessarily even know that they're developing or learning in those areas, because there's an urgency, say, around the cause that is
Yeah.
forcing them to communicate, forcing.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, and I mean forcing in a good way. Like, I'm forced to communicate because this is a cause I believe in.
Yeah.
I'm forced to connect and contribute to my world because this matters to
Mhm.
me. It just seems like there's a natural tie
Mm.
there to the model
There
that.
is, and that's that intrinsic motivation. You
Right.
can't, you can force kids to, do the math and do that. But if they see the purpose and why they're doing it and why that's so important,
Hmm.
and how it's helping the community, like social entrepreneurship, they can learn about business and, you know, um, all of those important skills that they're going to still use in the future, but they're also helping the community by solving those real world problems.
Yeah, and it just, what a sense of accomplishment and a sense of contribution for students as they really offer meaningful,
Mhm.
and maybe they're not always able to solve the issue, but they're at least able to contribute to the pursuit of the solution to what's happening in
Exactly.
that, right?
Yeah. And often kids don't think they have anything to offer. Like, what
Right.
am I going to do to actually help on that,
Hmm.
issue or cause? But they have so much to offer. It's
Yeah.
about that pairing of something that they're passionate about. And
Right.
that's what sparks, and they can't stop. I had many students that were in many different projects, and I'd have to say, okay, I think you need to spend a bit more time on the academics as well. Like,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're a little too passionate on this one here.
way too passionate. I'm so like, calm down.
You're not quitting
Bring that.
school. Yeah, no, I
But
can
it's
see
good
that.
because they go on to do careers in that field, and
Right.
I've seen that. It's
Mhm.
beautiful. They just
Yeah.
can't stop.
It's a way to explore your passion and
Mm,
truly find out if it's something that would drive you and fulfill you in terms of your
mm.
profession beyond school, beyond it just being a project. It's something that you
Exactly.
you
It
care.
goes beyond that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Taps into their sense of contribution. I love that. Now,
Mm,
you talk a lot about collaborative learning, so this is going to be a
mhm,
be a bit of a lengthy setup here because
mhm,
I have a number of converging thoughts that are kind of coming together for me over the last number of weeks. So I'm going to take a bit of time here to craft the perspective and or question, or at least the think aloud. So for you, Tara, and for the listening audience, bear with me here for a moment. So your emphasis on collaborative learning has me thinking and rethinking some assessment orthodoxy. As you know, my
mhm.
primary area of work is in assessment.
Yep.
And some of these thoughts are things that I've always believed in. In fact,
Mhm,
these thoughts are kind of coming together and making me rethink. So again, this is going to be a bit of a long lead up here. So we have had in assessment almost this militant assertion or orthodoxy that all achievement be measured individually, that group scores are taboo, that we need to be able to
mhm,
distinguish the individual's accomplishments and all of that. And in
mhm,
episode 2 and 3, I had Anthony Muhammad on, and he said something that stuck with me. And we were talking about the definition of success within the context of equity, and what is the
mm,
Eurocentric definition of success, and how do we contrast that? And here's what he said. And quote, in European culture, individual success is more important than collective success. And he said, in tropical communities and communities of color, group success is more important than individual success. Individual success can sometimes be looked at as insulting. And he goes on to say that in some African cultures, if I stick out as a show off, I'm actually taking away from the group collective, end quote.
mm,
So there's that. There's the idea of, okay, if we're thinking about equity and our broadest definition
mm,
that goes beyond that sort of traditional white Eurocentric view of what education is, there's that part. Okay, as we expand our definition of success. So now we have this notion of a 21st century skill, collaboration, one that we want to nurture and develop.
mm,
And then, of course, you emphasize the idea of collaborative learning as being effective in facilitating service learning experiences. So all of this is kind of coming together for me to make me feel as though we're going to have to relax some of this individual success orthodoxy at some
mm,
point. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, everything being about the group. We're not talking about group reading levels or group math skills. We understand
mhm,
that part will always remain individual. But
mm,
I'm wondering about creating some space uh, with some formal assessment or reporting or something
mhm,
around the collective, not just the individual. I
mm.
don't really have a
Yeah.
clear answer for this. It's kind of a
Mm,
wondering out loud, but
mm,
I'm just feel very compelled to consider, is there a way for us to talk about not just my accomplishment, but my contribution to the collective? How do we,
mm,
in some small, medium, or large way, formalize that and talk a little bit
mm.
about the individual's contribution to the collective? Thoughts on that, Tara? What do you think?
It's a great question and a great wondering. You've got me wondering.
That's the
And,
point.
yeah, it's a good one. I think kids, they're the toughest on themselves and working in a group. They're the first ones to say, you know, Jimmy hasn't been putting in and I do all the da, 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 da. And
Mhm,
I think they're the best ones to come up with some sort of rubric assessment, self-assessment,
mhm,
collaborative assessment on, what is it that they need to do as a group to be able to perform, and
mhm.
what is everyone's roles and responsibilities. And so
Right.
as part of that service learning process, I talked about the 5 stages.
Mhm,
Um, they do the investigation, and kids might be doing different things in the investigation, right? So in a group, and that they're all working on together. Then they come back together once they know what the issue is and the type of action that's needed. Then they come together and do the planning and preparation, and that's where they come up with who's going to do what role. So I think kids are the best to come up with some sort of a self-assessment, as as an individual they're self-assessing, but also as a collective collaborative team.
Yeah, I think of a parallel. You think of professional sports where not
Mm,
everyone on the team is the leaders. So you have role players, and not suggesting
exactly.
that students should take a
Yeah.
back seat, but how do we contribute to the collective? When I work for a
Mhm.
business,
Yeah.
the company's success, how do you separate marketing from product development? It kind of starts flowing together.
Mm,
So it just makes me
yeah.
wonder about how we can think about the collective and an individual's
Mm,
contribution to collective, as opposed to what do I get out of the collective, almost an
exactly.
input
Yeah.
versus an output idea. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it'd be something
And what are the
interesting.
impacts as a
Right.
team, as a collaborative team, and for them to
Right.
reflect on that
Hmm.
is really important during the process,
Hmm.
not just at the end. Sometimes reflections, one of the end things, the final, but I think it's important to them reflect as a team. And
Yeah.
you said team leader. I mean, students can, in a team, everyone could have a chance to be the leader in that
Right.
team,
Right.
so that they are all experiencing what it means or what it feels like to be that leader.
Hmm.
And every student leads in different ways. They
Right.
don't
Right.
all lead from way out in front. Some lead from behind,
Right.
which is,
Right.
it's nice for them to see different styles of leadership. I
Right.
mean, we've seen some interesting leadership in the States, that we've been watching on the TV here.
Hmm.
Um, so, we can have plenty of discussions about what leadership could
Right.
look like or is like
About
around the
leadership
world.
styles. Yeah. And well, fair enough. And we'll just leave it at that. Um,
We really like the Canadian leader.
there
Just
you go.
saying.
Yeah.
Very
um,
good.
it makes me also think about when you said all students have a chance to learn what it feels like to lead. It also
Mm.
makes me think that students have to learn what it's like to be led, and to
Yeah.
understand about how you if could because if everyone's the alpha,
Mm.
that type of collaborative team is probably not going to. And again,
It's not
it's not
successful.
right. It's
Exactly.
not
Yeah.
the idea that you force yourself to take a back seat, but
Yeah.
there are times where we have to build consensus. There are times.
Exactly.
So we think
Mm.
about, I just, for me, it just, it has me, I'm sort of in my head right now thinking about, and I haven't flushed it out, but I just wonder about, I think that the service learning model really does help contribute to the idea of how do I contribute to the collective?
Mm.
What's my role in this? And because it's interesting to me that when I talk about collaboration and I talk about, collaborative learning,
Mm.
I talk about it from the point like my ability to collaborate is
Mm.
influenced by who I'm collaborating with. It isn't
Exactly.
just this
Yeah.
vacuum, right? So
Yeah,
I
and
wonder.
and they're gonna learn, in the future. They're not always gonna get to choose who they're collaborating with. It's about learning to collaborate effectively, with
Mhm.
a range of people, and that we all
Right,
have something to offer and learn from each other. It's
right.
not, it's that's the skills that they are learning by having those, various collaborative groups that they end up
Hmm.
working with.
Yeah. It
And
seems,
appreciating the diversity and equity, in
yeah.
everyone's got different skills and
Hmm.
abilities, and being able to appreciate that, or agree to disagree, and we all have biases and things like
Hmm.
that. Those are those great conversations kids that end up having
Yeah,
working in those collaborative teams. So, and
yeah.
I think that's been hard for kids during COVID. They feel so isolated at home,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
we still need to have those opportunities for students online to be able to collaborate together and
Hmm.
talk to each other. I know
Right.
my son, who's 10, really struggled with that because there was a class of 20, and you know they just didn't get to talk to each other,
Right.
and that was the saddest part. It
Hmm.
was like, oh, they just need some collaboration time just to talk to each other.
Yeah, it just is. I think it really has brought to the forefront the how much we all miss that human connection, right? And
Yeah,
students are no
yeah.
different. Yeah.
Definitely.
The other part, in terms of the collaborative teams, I can see that the collaborative learning model, because we share a common cause, that
Mm,
the cause, in a way, now you tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems as though the cause that we're collectively pursuing takes precedent over ego, or because we're all
totally.
passionate about this topic, we might
Yep.
find an easier time of developing consensus because
Mm,
we all have a
completely.
single,
Yep.
right,
And you just always have to go back to what is the need, why we're all here, what's the purpose,
right,
Once
right.
kids are reminded of the purpose of why they're doing what they're doing, some
Hmm.
of those little nitpicky things that they would normally have in a team in the
Hmm.
classroom completely go out the window.
Yeah.
Or Johnny forgot to bring the paint, and the rest of the group's like, oh my God, we can't paint today because there's no paint. So, they
Right.
certainly learn their roles and responsibilities.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. No, I just think there's such a natural. I mean, the more you're talking about the model and the possibilities and the potential, the more you
Mm,
can see how this just, it's hard for adults sometimes to remember the big picture
mm,
of why, and let alone teenagers or even younger.
yeah.
So reminding them of that, I think, can keep them on point. I want to
Yeah.
expand the view now a little bit of service learning, to expand to the idea of, we've talked about collaboration, but let's expand and
Mhm.
talk about 21st century skills in general, critical
Mm.
thinking and all of that.
Yeah.
And I think you've talked a little bit about this already, but let's circle
Mhm.
back and maybe be a little bit more formal with
Mhm.
connecting the dots between service learning and the development of 21st century competencies. Like,
Mhm.
where do you see that overlap, and where can skills of schools, I should say, if they're pursuing an agenda of developing 21st century skills or
Mm.
21st century learners, how specifically does service learning feed into that? Like I said, you've alluded to this, but I want to
Mm.
have it to be a
Yeah.
little bit more formal.
So I talked about the 5 stages. So in that first stage in the investigation, kids have to put on their critical thinking hat, to really dig into that issue. What is the issue? What is the need in the community? Why are we doing what we're doing? How do they understand it thoroughly? So that's where they need to talk to experts and really get some data on what is the need to do action. And kids really just want to jump straight into action, but then they
Right.
they realize, oh, we don't actually know what the issue is or what the need in the community is. So
Hmm.
you'll often see that with some community service, and it's good to know where you're at in your school, because you can always go to the next level. Okay, we're doing community service, how can we adjust it to add some more service learning into the equation? So those skills are going to come up as kids are working together on that issue. So, as I said, critical thinking, problem solving. They
Hmm.
need to be able to do that to be able to get to the next stage, to be able to do the planning and preparation. So until they've been using those skills and self-assessing where they're at, like I said before, and I've shared my single point rubric that
Yep.
has the different um, key skills and dispositions that kids need to be developing. But until they understand where they're at, they can't know what they're going to do to actually try and improve on that. So a
Hmm.
student can reflect and say, well, I'm not very empathetic. So then they start to make a plan of how they can actually improve on developing empathy.
Hmm. Yeah, it to me seems like such a natural fit for, again, coming back to something we talked about earlier, the relevance,
Mm,
the putting this 21st century skill into action, and making
yeah,
sure that I'm acting upon it in a way that is so authentic,
yeah.
and immersed in a kind of context that I care
Mm.
about, and I want
Yeah, and
to
they're
serve.
like you said before, they're forced to communicate, so they actually have to improve on their
Right.
communication. They're going to be told
Yeah.
by the partners pretty quick, well, actually, we
Yeah.
don't speak like that around here, and
Hmm. That's right.
so they
Yeah.
they're definitely, and even collaborating with each other.
Hmm.
They're learning those skills by doing them.
I'm starting to connect the dots now more about your Venn diagram, even as you're
Mhm.
talking, because I'm seeing that if you just immerse yourself in the service part, when you don't have the background knowledge to understand what exactly you're addressing,
Mm,
or it may seem like you're going rogue because you haven't partnered with people who've been working on that issue, right? So I have some learning to do. I need to do my
yeah,
homework. I need to
yeah.
understand that background knowledge. I also should try to develop a collaborative or a partnership with people who've
Mhm.
been working on this issue so I can use
Yeah.
my time efficiently and effectively,
Mm.
and that I'm not actually countering things that they might be doing. And now
Yeah.
I can start serving. So it really, those dots are getting connected for me, even more so
Mm.
the more you talk about the model. So I hope that's happening for others who,
Mhm.
I mean, some of the listeners may be very familiar with the service learning model, but if you're not, I'm starting to see more clearly about how all of those work together to develop 21st century learners. Okay, Tara, here's the big question. I'm in. I go to the conference. I listen to Tara's presentation. I like a stalker. I follow Tara around the entire conference for 2 or 3 days. And at the end of the conference, I'm like, I'm in. Okay. I'm in as
Okay.
a teacher. I want our school to develop a service learning model. So
Mhm.
where do I start? How does a school start? First, okay, how does an individual start? But then how does a
Mhm.
school begin? And then how do we develop this model going forward?
Yeah. Many different parts to that, so I'm gonna try and
Yeah,
answer all of
take
that.
your time because
Um,
this might
so
be the most important part. So take your time
yeah.
on this for sure.
So for teachers, just implementing the 5 stages within a unit that they're doing. So choose a unit you're doing, have a look at the concept, think about, you know, who could we be collaborating with as a partnership? Most schools have some sort of partnerships already. So I suppose it's
Mhm.
knowing what the partnerships are, or, get students to sort of look around for the partnerships too. Who could we be collaborating with on this issue? So you can get students to sort of, talk about, and sometimes parents even at the school know different partnerships as well. So you can sort of find them, but it's important to sort of vet them as well, for child
Right,
safety. So we want to make
of
sure
course.
that they're the right partners. It's a safe environment for students to be going to, or the partners can come to the school. Some schools can't actually leave, their campus. So it's nice
Right,
sometimes that the partners can come to the school to collaborate with them. I know we did that in Lagos.
right.
And so, yeah, implement the 5 stages in a unit, give kids time. Most kids do some sort of investigation in a project that they might be
Hmm.
working on.
Yep.
Give them time to plan and prepare for
Hmm.
the type of action that they're going to do. And then make time for the action. That's sometimes the thing that gets thrown out.
Right,
Because, oops, we got to the end of the unit, we didn't get to the action part.
right,
But there's
right.
different ways you could do it. You might do the investigation in unit 1, then you might do the planning and preparation in unit 2. So there's different approaches that
Hmm.
schools and teachers can apply to that. And I told you a little bit about our serve learn model,
Yep.
where 1 hour once a week, which is what we did in Lagos and at Vin School in Vietnam as well.
Mm-hmm.
uh, where students are all doing service learning at the same time. So you can get beautiful cross grade, vertical and
Hmm.
horizontal
Hmm.
collaboration happening. So our 11th grade, their unit is on leadership and mentorship. So their whole role for a year is to learn how to lead and mentor others. Every student is a leader and mentor, and they're responsible for helping others to do that as well. So they're
Hmm.
working with the younger grade levels and in developing those skills. Um,
That's
so
yeah, that's really I love that idea of so individual teacher, the way to get going is to just start to infuse those
just
stages
infuse it in
into
a
their
unit. Yeah,
right,
try the 5 stages in a unit. I mean,
right.
we develop standards and benchmarks.
Hmm.
Backwards planner, backwards
Yeah,
design.
for
So
sure.
the standards and benchmarks, we have standards and benchmarks for the 5 stages, and people
Hmm.
can access them on our website if they want to have a look at those.
Right.
They're free to use.
And then from a school perspective, I really love that idea of everyone doing the service learning and being able to mix the students in a way that allows for that extra layer of mentorship,
Yeah,
and almost as though a cause or a focus
yeah.
can have a long lasting legacy as kids graduate, but then new kids move through the school. If it is
Mhm,
in fact even a K-12 school, as many international schools are, but even
mhm.
if you're a high school or a middle school or an elementary school,
Yeah.
there is still overlap and the opportunities for students to learn from each other, that leadership and mentor part.
Yeah, and so they're at the start when that's the first year basically, but then after a couple of years when the teachers are used to it and the students are used to, we have this time, we're doing our service all together, everyone's involved.
Mm-hmm.
you can choose which concept you want to do, right?
Hmm.
So imagine
Right.
that students and teachers choosing which concept they're passionate about that they want to work on. So then you've
Right.
got vertical and horizontal,
Yeah.
teams all collaborating together on
Yeah.
something that they're really passionate about.
Yeah.
And maybe it's, a half day. Maybe it's, so they're spending a lot more time on it. Maybe the units every 6 weeks. You've got
Hmm.
a different one, you go choose another one that you're interested in doing. That's that real personalization to the
Right.
learning that could happen with, using those concepts, and teachers and students choosing things that they're interested in, collaborating together. Maybe it's something you don't know anything about. I don't know anything about, you know human rights, so I'm going to go and do that human rights
Right.
unit.
Right.
So
Hmm.
that's the possibilities that I see, after several years of doing the serve learn curriculum. That's my ideal.
Yeah.
People usually look at me like I'm a bit out there, but I'm like,
No.
can you imagine everyone
Yeah.
choosing what they're going to do?
I can imagine it because, there is something to the idea that, when you're young, I mean, this is probably
Mm,
true of some adults as well, but when you're young,
yeah.
sometimes you don't even know what you're passionate about until you're exposed to
Exactly.
it, right?
Until
So,
you have those opportunities. So,
yeah,
I've had people ask me before, well, should it be mandatory? And I'm like, well, to an extent, I think all schools should
yeah.
have some sort of service learning involved, where all students are involved in that. So at the start, when I was at AISJ and I set up the program, it was a mandatory and a
Yeah.
graduation requirement. So all
Hmm.
students were involved, and it was IB, but it wasn't, the rest of the school wasn't, you know,
Hmm.
um, had the IB program. So it was like, well, why are they only doing it in grade 11 and 12? Why are we not doing that down in elementary school? So then it was,
Right.
okay, so schools need to think about how are they preparing students for grade 11 and 12. So,
Hmm.
we had students using Manage Back, to in grade 9 and 10, so that they
Hmm.
were ready as soon as they went into grade 12. 11 and 12, they knew the 5 stages. That was before the 5 stages was part of CAS.
Hmm.
We were already implementing that way before, so, and then students in elementary and middle school are getting those same experiences. So every year students had access to those opportunities in
Right.
units. And I still feel that's really important. So schools need to know where they're at and then what they need to do to make those next steps. I said
Hmm.
we've got a survey on our website that sort of asks those specific questions, and
Right.
that ends up forming part of your framework. So do you
Hmm.
have clarity and consistency, in your school about what is service learning? Why are we doing it?
Right.
How does it link to our vision and mission statement? A lot of
Hmm.
schools, like I said, have it in their vision and mission statement, but they're not actually living it. So until you self-assess where we're at, it's hard to know those steps that you need to take. Is there
Right.
professional development? Is there
Hmm.
time for teachers to do the planning? If
Yeah.
there's some of those little elements are missing, the program's generally not sustainable. So
Right.
that's the idea, is to get a sustainable program.
Right, for sure. Now, as far as the program at the school level is concerned, do you recommend that, assuming, there is a budget, assuming there's time, space, et cetera,
Yeah.
I can imagine that schools could be overwhelmed eventually with the number of partnerships. So do you advocate for there to be a coordinator or somebody
Yeah,
who
definitely.
focuses on
There
that?
should
So
be
talk a
a.
little bit about that.
Mhm. So when I was at ASJ, I was the coordinator, but then I
Hmm.
needed divisional reps as well in each division. We had 2 campuses, so
Hmm.
Pretoria and Johannesburg. So we had, reps at Pretoria and reps at Joburg, so that you're also growing leadership and mentorship. So you're not the only one who is running
Hmm.
the program. Everyone has a responsibility, and
Right.
um, the partnerships, I would always do the sign off on which partnerships, because I knew what we were looking for and what the connections in the curriculum were. So
Hmm.
we developed sort of a little criteria list of how to sort of evaluate a partnership. Do they have the same sort of vision and mission, aligned with the school? Is it safe?
Hmm.
We always also had a no cash policy, so it wasn't about a handout.
Hmm.
It was more about a collaborative together. So that was always
Right.
in those conversations I'd always have at the start. Finding out those real needs
Hmm.
um, is important, and what worked really well is having all the partners meet each other as well, because then they could collaborate on different things as well. So
Yeah.
Yeah, big part is having partnerships, but you could just have one, just
Right.
partnering with another school. You
Mhm.
can do all sorts of things,
Right.
depending on what their needs are. So
Yeah. So it's just something to think about as a school's
yeah,
model begins to evolve. You may get to a point where you want to consider one or a handful of coordinators, and
yeah,
obviously
yeah,
the proof of need would be that there is a groundswell of support, and the kids are clamoring for this
yeah.
opportunity
They're
to.
interested. Yeah, yeah, and
Right,
they want to
for sure.
collaborate. Yeah.
That's right. So I
Mm.
want to finish by just giving you a chance because I think there's a lot of really great content on your website. Servelearn.co is the website. And I'll mention that again at the end of this interview, but to make sure that people are able to get there. But could you talk a little bit about you have so many great resources. There's a blog, there's some free resources. Talk about, when people go to your website, which I would really encourage people to do because it really is, it's user friendly. There's a lot of great information there. What's on the website? What can people access when they're there? And what are some of the things you mentioned that survey? So let's talk a little bit about what people can find on the servelearn.co website.
Yeah, so we have a range of different services that we provide with different consultants around the world. They also have full teaching jobs. So I'm
Mhm.
the main person working full time in Servlearn, but we
Right.
have many different consultants that can help around the world.
Mhm.
So we really tailor our strategy to meet the needs of each learning organisation. So it's understanding what the needs of the schools are, and maybe it's professional development that teachers need to get that understanding.
Mhm.
Maybe it's student leadership training. There's so many different elements. You might be unit writing. So during COVID lockdown, we ended up taking all what we would do in person in a workshop and putting them online.
Mhm.
So we now have a 101, a 201, a 301, which is the coordinator one. So the
Mhm.
101 is basically what is service learning? Why do we do it? So it's a great place to start. And, we can do packages for schools.
Mhm.
201 is really digging into curriculum and the alignment. So, having a unit that you want to integrate service learning in, and then we help people do the 5 stages and an assessment that would go with that.
Mhm.
And then the 301 is the coordination. So what do you need to do as a coordinator to
Right.
run a school? A lot of schools say, your bags, you're the coordinator. And they go, what do I do?
What do I do? Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so we help them come up
Yeah.
with alignment with strategic planning and an action plan. So they come away
Mhm.
with a really thorough action plan to be able to implement with
Yeah.
their school. So they have to collaborate with their principals and director of school to be able to
Mhm.
complete that. So yeah, and
Yeah.
then we have the student leadership one as well. So
Mhm.
getting students to be the leaders. So what I really loved at ASJ was that the students were really running the program. In the end, the teachers were the facilitators, and
Right.
it was great because they would run all the leadership for all the new
Mhm.
students and help mentor. They would go and set goals, do feedback,
Mhm.
do the funding. It was incredible. So to be able to get students to really lead a school in that
Mhm.
program is quite powerful. So that's our
Yeah.
student leadership one as well.
That student leadership part
Mm.
reminds me of just listeners. You'll recall that in episode 4, I had my colleague Nicole. Episode 5, she's in
Mm.
Minneapolis, Tara, and she has this organization, a nonprofit called Thrive Education, which is putting students in as partners and reimagining education. And it just reminds me so much different, contexts and different themes, but the
Yeah.
same idea of putting students at the forefront as real partners in the learning experience as opposed to just giving lip service to it. So it's just a lot of dots connecting for me in terms of the collective work. Tara is also being rather humble. Listeners, when you go to that website, you're going to see a great collection of blog posts, really
There's a
thorough,
lot of
well,
blogs.
yeah. And listen, Tara, well researched, very thorough, very detailed. So a lot of great content there that is an
Thank
easy
you.
way, listeners, if you're intrigued about service learning, a great spot to check out. So I'll mention that again as we finish up. But Tara, we're going to finish today with a little bit of fun, as I always do. I'm going to ask you, this is a chance for people to get to know you a little bit. on a personal level, just to get to know you a little bit more. Nothing too intrusive, just some fun questions that I'm going to put to you that you don't know are coming, but I'm going to ask these questions, and just a chance for us to have a little fun banter and some fun questions. But again, nothing that is going to embarrass you or anything like that. So
Okay.
I've got 5 questions to finish up, and then I've got one final question
Right.
about success that I'm going to ask you. But here's the first question I want to ask you, just a personal perspective. If you had to choose, if you had to choose between these two, one vacation for 4 weeks or 4 vacations of 1 week each?
4 vacations, definitely.
Okay. And how come? Why 4 vacations of 1 week each?
Because you could spread them out, during the year instead of having a big chunk. And it's one of those things, like in Australia, we have 2-week holidays every 10 weeks, and we don't have the 2 months off like, North America does. So in June, July, that's our winter. We don't, we want to go somewhere tropical, obviously, in June, July, but it's just for the 2 weeks. So you have 10 weeks and then you have 2 weeks. So I've always really liked that I always know I'm going to get a holiday soon. So
yeah, it's nice. I
sometimes find 4 weeks is too much. I go, oh, I'm ready to get back to work. I'm online researching and studying.
Right. I think by week 3, I would be worried about all the emails piling up and all the stuff that was in okay, number 2. What was the last song, band, or playlist you were listening to before we came together for this interview? What's the last song you listened to?
Oh my.
I'm not going to be able to check. So
No, I know. And I'm trying to remember. I always just have the radio on. Honestly, I don't.
Okay.
I don't
How about this?
what actual song I was listening to.
No problem. Favorite band or solo artist growing up when you were a teenager? Who was your favorite? Who you were obsessed with?
In Excess when I was a youngster. I was really into them. I had lots of favorite bands, and Dave Grohl, kind of liked his stuff too. So,
I'm a big NXS fan as well, so that we have in common. 3, what is the one thing about Australians that people outside of Australia almost universally misunderstand? I know you're not a monolith, but people have a perspective on Australians. What are we getting wrong? What do we get wrong about Australia or Australians, or what is it that we continue to misunderstand?
I think Australians are a little sarcastic, and their sense of humor is a little different, as opposed. I mean, there's a lot of banter, and I think people misinterpret that, is that obviously we know they're joking, but other people find it sometimes a little offensive. So don't take our banter offensively, because we're just bantering.
That's just the way you are, for sure.
It's just how we are.
Yeah.
And we have lots of slang. And so what I also learned was that one thing that was very interesting is that you guys, that you should know this, and I didn't know this until I worked in Kuwait. You guys call it a fanny. We call something else.
Okay.
Your other side. Anyway, it's very confusing. A girl told me she fell on a fanny, and I was like, oh my God, that's really.
Oops.
You can cut that out.
No, that's fine. Hey, it is what it is.
That's one thing you should know. Don't say fanny.
That's right. Don't say that in Australia. It's
and
all.
Thong.
And thong, yes. Well, yeah.
Exactly. There you go. There's two things.
There you go. It's all about the learning, Tara. That's right. Flip-flops. That's right. Number 4, if you were forced to change careers, like say education wasn't on the table, and let's just assume schooling or training is taken care of. If you were forced to change careers, what would you choose and why? What's another career you'd be intrigued by?
I'd probably work for national parks in conservation. Okay. Quite passionate about that. So doing regeneration projects and things like that.
That's interesting.
Erosion and I don't know. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
my little pet projects that I do on the
Yeah.
side. I live close to the beach, so I'm working
Okay.
on a conservation project down there. We've got some erosion, so I'm replanting, and yeah, probably that.
Okay. So you just had to throw that in there that you live close to the beach. You just want to
I
rub it in
do,
a little
really
bit more.
close,
Yeah. Yeah.
literally over the
Yeah.
hill.
Yeah. It's okay. We're fine. We're all fine, Tara.
Yeah, 30 degrees. It's
Yeah. Well,
beautiful.
yeah. Okay. Enough already. All right. Last question. This is a question that around Christmas time always gets debated, and it's the question about Die Hard, the movie.
Oh.
Is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
If you're a diehard fan, it is
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay. All right. So that's 2 for 2. Last week, Bill Farrader said Die Hard was most definitely a Christmas movie. So the yes side of this equation is 2-0. It's always interesting that a movie, just because it takes place at Christmas time, there's that debate about whether it's actually a Christmas movie. But so far,
Yeah.
the
It
yes
is. Well,
side is
what is a Christmas movie? What qualifies for a
right.
Christmas
That's
movie? Does it
another
have to
question.
have Christmas carols or a Christmas tree?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's
A
exactly.
postman, a Santa.
Right. Well, if you're watching
No.
there's a certain formula that most Christmas movies follow, but we'll see.
Yeah.
It's interesting though. But yeah, it must be interesting. I guess from a North American perspective, you grew up this way, but from a North American perspective, unless you live in the southern part of the United States or somewhere, being in a warm climate at Christmas time is just something that is atypical for me.
We're at the
be wonderful.
beach. Yeah, we're at the beach. I never understood why Santa was always in those woolly clothes. As a kid, I was like, why is he not wearing his beach outfit? He should be at the beach. It's too hot. It's 30 degrees usually on Christmas Day, and we're all in the pool or at the beach.
Yeah, just an interesting an interesting difference between we I guess we always assume things about where we live and forget sometimes that these things take place at the same time of year, but the weather's not the same and the traditions may not be always the same.
Yeah.
Right, for
We
sure.
don't have the mulled wine because it's not cold. It's
right.
It's warm. We're like, put some ice in that.
Right. Exactly. All right. I have one final question for you, Tara. And this is a question I've been asking all of the people I've interviewed, because one of the things I'm trying to do with the podcast is kind of run this theme about success and happiness. And, eventually we're going to expand that as far as the podcast is concerned. But I'm finishing every interview with this question. And it is the question of success. If a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, what is your definition of success? How would you answer them? What would you say to them?
I think success is whatever you want it to be. Whether you're successful in, learning something new, success can be achieving a goal, can be happiness. It's not always about money or, I don't know. It's a hard question to actually answer. For me, it's about being happy and, happy in where you are in your life, wherever that may be.
So it's interesting the way that it makes me think that as you're answering that, it's not, the person saying, what is your definition of success? And you're turning that around on them and saying, what is your definition of success? Like, how do you define it? And then seeking out whatever that definition is. I mean, that's an interesting take on that for sure, that it really is up to each of us to define what we think success is. And
I think we all have a different opinion on what success is. So it's a great one to chat about.
It's a personal definition for sure. Tara, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. Listeners, I would really encourage you to follow Tara on Twitter. Her Twitter handle is @Tara M. Barton. That's on Twitter. You also follow the Serve Learn handle on Twitter. That's @ServeLearnCo, CO at the end. And Serve Learn Co is also on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram and you want to follow Serve Learn Co there as well. And Tara had mentioned, we talked a couple of times about the website. The website is www.servelearn.co. And that's where you can find all of those great resources. Tara, again, I really want to thank you for carving out some time for this. Is for for me, and I hope for listeners, it's been very insightful in terms of learning about what a service learning model could look like. And I'm sure many listeners are inspired to either begin their service learning journey or maybe reinvigorate their service learning
Hmm.
journey and begin to focus and take it to another level. So again, I want to thank you so much. And I know at some point down the road, we'll have a chance to do this again, but thanks so much, Tara.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's been
All right,
fun.
great. Awesome.